Welcome to Bridging Gaps, the business podcast sharing the challenges and stories of fellow business owners.
Hello and welcome. I'm Deborah Levitt, your host. This week, I'm in conversation with Dayne Shuda of Ghost Blog Writers. Dayne is based in Wisconsin, and we had a chat back in September on a beautiful autumn day, or fall, as they say in the US and Canada. And Dayne shares with me his journey from leaving university, starting his own business, acknowledging that it wasn't working, moving into employment, before then moving back out of employment to running Ghost Blog Writers, a successful and growing business. So please join me in welcoming Dayne to the show. Welcome to the show, and thank you very much for taking time to be on. What's the weather doing over there in Wisconsin?
It's probably the nicest time of year in Wisconsin. We're getting into our autumn period and the leaves are starting to change. The August is usually pretty hot and humid. And while that's nice, the fall is really a really nice time here.
I used to go down to North Carolina a lot, to Raleigh, and they always used to say that, sort of September, October was the best time because, again, it wasn't too hot, it wasn't humid, and it's a beautiful time of the year, the autumn, isn't it?
It is, yeah. Around here, we can go to apple orchards and pumpkin patches, and the wineries are really beautiful. So it's probably one of the nicest kind of 6 to 8 week periods of the year.
You then have to hold on to it as you go through that winter.
Yes, yeah.
So, Dayne, you have a company which is Ghost Blog Writers, and I was wondering if you could just tell me and the listeners, a little bit about what it is that Ghost Blog Writers does.
Sure. So it's a blog writing service for businesses. Any business that has a website that wants to bring some traffic to the website in addition to advertising kind of through the organic channels, search, social. Usually they know they need a blog or some kind of ongoing content to help their audience and attract that audience, but they don't want to do the writing themselves. They don't like writing, might not have the time, but usually we find that it's kind of a struggle for a lot of people for whatever the reason might be. And so that's kind of the need we fill. We have about 60 writers on the team that are in the US, the UK, Canada, and a few in Australia. And each time a potential client comes on board, we kind of try to match them up with the writer that we think is the best fit, and they kind of take over the blogging for that company.
So how do you ascertain, what the right fit is going to be? What would you be looking for when you're speaking to the client to be able to then go, okay, I think this blog writer is the person who's going to be able to get your voice across?
Yep. Yeah. So the voice is one. So we get some information from the client, usually who their target audience or target customer is and what the industry is. And then also, if we can, kind of who the person is that is kind of the author or I guess the voice of the brand. And then we kind of send the opportunity to the writers, and first we'll see who's interested. And usually the ones that are interested in the industry or have experience in that industry. And so we'll kind of see who expresses interest, and then kind of from our knowledge of the writers too, we'll also kind of determine if it's going to be a good fit.
And do you do any sort of, trial blogs where they do put something together that the client's then able to look at and go, yeah, this is what I was looking for? Or is it more of a, okay, you've got this person and we're going to put the first few blogs out and then see how it goes?
Yeah, we always start with the trial posts. So we kind of discuss ideas with the client and see what they're looking for, gauge their expectations, and then we find a writer and they have them do a first post. And that's a big step. It gives the client something to look at, see if there's potential, see if maybe we need to try a different writer if it's too far from what they're looking for. But yeah, that first post, we usually learn a lot, both about the client, and then they can kind of see what the writer can do. And usually we can see if it's going to be a good fit right from that first post. So that's one of the important steps that we do.
And where do most of your clients come from? Are they mainly US based, or do they come from around the world in the same way that your writers do?
Yeah, it's mostly in the US, but it definitely comes from all over the States, and then Canada, the UK, and Australia have kind of been the big ones, and it's kind of been that way from the start. A few of the initial clients were from Australia, which surprised me, but it's kind of continued, and so we've also had a few writers from Australia as well, with the different types of language from the US to Canada, UK, and Australia, and just knowing kind of the different cultural aspects too. So yeah, they kind of come from all over.
And do you find, as you were saying, that there's those cultural aspects, there's the terminology. Do you find that if you've got a client in Australia, the best fit is going to be an Australian writer, even if they're not physically located in Australia at the time?
Usually. Yep, usually. We do have a few writers that once they kind of gain experience writing for a UK company or Australian company, they can kind of start picking up on the nuances. But we do, that's one of the things we do look at is if the writer is from a certain country, or even in the United States, if they're from a certain state, sometimes that can help just with little differences. So that's one of the criteria. I wouldn't say it's make or break, but we definitely do look at that because it seems to come into play.
Well, and even things like spelling. I remember when I first came over to England and I was doing temp secretarial work, and we're going back a long time at the moment, because England was, when I first came over in terms of technology, was a little bit behind Canada and the US. And so I was actually doing things on a typewriter. And I can remember typing up something and taking it in to, the guy I was doing some work for. And he came back and he'd sort of mark all of these things. And I remember going back in and going, those are spelled correctly. At which point I learned about the fact that, we used a Z and England uses an S, and all of just those little things. And Canada is this weird amalgamation where we use some things the same way that England does, but we use other things the same way that the US does. So it's not straightforward.
No, I've run into some interesting ones over the years that you just would not know unless you're using them all the time.
So when if we go back a little ways, I know that you said that you were always interested in business. And I think at the age of 22, you decided to start off and invest your money into a website. Do you want to tell me a little bit about what happened there? Because I know that didn't work out as you'd hoped it would.
Yeah, I'd always wanted to start a business. I guess I don't remember the exact age, but it had to be fairly young. I think I saw business owners kind of throughout my life that I kind of looked at and seemed to be a life I wanted to have or strive for. So I kind of always had that in mind. I went to university that had kind of an entrepreneur program. And as part of that entrepreneur program, I wrote, I guess you could call it a business plan. Looking back, it wasn't much of a business plan, but that was kind of the project. And at the time, it was right around 2006, and so it was Facebook, MySpace, like social media type sites, and I thought I could create kind of a niche one, not at any certain scale, but that was kind of before there were website builders and things like that. So spent most of my savings and took out a little loan to launch a website, and about 2 or 3 years into it, I just kind of decided it was not working out. I wasn't good with selling advertising and bringing in traffic or making it appealing, but just kind of chalked it up to a learning experience and kind of started from square one, really not knowing what the next step would be, but just kind of stepping away from what I had been doing and maybe trying to discover something else. So yeah, the website, I look back on it fondly because I learned quite a bit, and I think I needed to take that step, but it was certainly painful, and you're kind of embarrassed by when, I mean, family and friends would try to be nice and they would ask you how it's going, and then you'd have to tell them it's not going well or decided to move on. And I think I was harder on myself more than anyone else was looking down on me, but it was definitely kind of a struggle during those years.
And I think you're right in terms of being harder on yourself. I think we quite often are our own, harshest critic. And one of the things that I hear, I guess, regularly, if you're speaking to somebody who's a counselor or a coach or even, a good friend, is to treat yourself as that friend, because we'll be much kinder and much more gentle and supportive of somebody else than we are of ourselves, which is, well, silly, really, but we all do it, don't we?
Yep, I like that. I like that approach because it makes a lot of sense. We, like you said, we don't give ourselves the same compassion that we would give someone else if they were in the exact same situation.
So I have somebody at the moment who we're doing an accountability group with, and I've been really pleased because the other people in the group as well have said the same thing to her. She keeps going, oh, I haven't done this, and we're all going, do you know what? You have done so much. You are really hard on yourself, and you need to be celebrating these things. And it's taken, I think, all three of us saying it independently for her to finally start going, okay, maybe I am being hard on myself. But otherwise, she's just driving herself and feeling disappointed. And yet she's achieving so much, and couldn't see it, or at least not initially. So when as you said, leaving, giving up on the website. Well, actually, I won't say giving up, because I think there is value in recognizing when something isn't working. And it's actually harder to say this isn't working and I'm going to walk away than it is to just keep, I guess, flogging it and hoping that it'll eventually turn into something. So it's quite a brave move to make that decision. But I can understand, those feelings of, it didn't work at the time and it's hard. But from there, you went on, and I think you said you went to work for a footwear catalog company.
Yep.
So how did that feel, that you'd tried that dream of being an entrepreneur, of having your own business, and now you were going in and actually working for another company? How did you find that transition, and how did it make you feel? Because I know a lot of people either do go back into, employment or wonder about it as well if things aren't going smoothly.
Yeah, there was a little crossover. So I was doing the website, and then kind of still in the early period, and then I started looking for a job, kind of in the marketing field, business management field, and found the footwear catalog job, which I didn't know anything about the industry. But when I first met with the person who would become my boss, he was real nice, and it seemed like a really nice company, and so that I was okay not kind of working on my own, and I was looking forward to kind of learning more about business, because up to that point didn't really have any on-hand experience, and my grades in college were not good in the generals. In the business, they were pretty good, but I know going up against other students, it probably didn't look good. But the website, I think, or I know because my boss told me, he said that made my resume kind of stand out, and the job turned out to be managerial, kind of entrepreneurial, where you're kind of in charge of, they had about 8 catalogs, and I guess I was kind of in charge of about 2 of them, kind of managing all the different aspects, or learning to manage and then managing. And so once I got that job, right from the beginning, I really liked it. I liked the people. I was learning a lot every day. Still doing the website, but kind of on the side in the evenings and at night. But yeah, the job, it wasn't too bad of a transition. Especially, I think I lucked out in the type of job it was, because I was able to get some really good experience and learn a lot about business.
And do you think that that it gave you some of the skills that had been lacking in when you were trying to do the business? So you said you weren't very good at selling the advertising, that type of thing. Did this job deliver on some of those and help you to build them?
It did. Some of the big ones were, not that it's a difficult concept, but really getting in on the nuances of um, profit and loss and lifetime value. And the catalog industry, you're always looking at um, who you can sell catalog or send catalogs to, and what response you need or you can expect so that it is profitable, and looking at how long the lifetime of a customer might be. So a lot of things like that that I've learned now can apply to all kinds of businesses. And that's just one example. There's a lot I learned from my boss about how to manage people and all kinds of different things, working with coworkers and working with vendors. It's more than I could even probably acknowledge, but yeah, it was a very good experience. I'm sure I would have learned some of it along the way on my own, but I'm glad I had that experience.
Yeah, you can learn things, without a doubt, learn them on your own, and you learn them through trial and error. But by having somebody there who's supporting you and helping you to take
Mm-hmm.
those steps, it can make a huge difference. And I know that over here, anyway, I'm not sure if it's the same in the US, that quite often if somebody's moving into a managerial a managerial role, that they don't actually get training in those things like the people management, that it's, you were a great programmer and now we're going to make you the head of the programming department. And nobody's thought about the fact that they were a great doer,
Mm-hmm.
and that they're going to need support and help to become a great leader. And that's quite a gap. So if you were getting support in those things as well, that's really, important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was getting support. It was learning specifics, and it was also, I tried to be very observant of who the successful people were in the company, and trying to take away lessons from what they did and try to learn it and then use it in my own work experience.
And was this, so, bear with me on my geography. So Wisconsin is the state, isn't it?
Yes. Yep.
So that's what I thought. I was fairly certain, but you know how you just sometimes aren't. So were you, Wisconsin is big, but were you in a fairly small town? Were you still sort of working in your hometown, or had you gone to somewhere bigger? Were there other things that were maybe driving or impacting what you were doing as well?
Yeah, I would say the area where I am is the city is called Eau Claire. It's about, I think it's up to about 70,000 people, and that's where I am now. And nearby is a smaller city. I think it's about 15 or 20,000, and that's where the footwear company was located. So a relatively pretty small community, very small community. Not too far away, we have Minneapolis, Minnesota, which is fairly big metropolis in the United States, and a lot of people I know from university would kind of come to the university where we were in Wisconsin and go back to Minneapolis and look for more opportunity there. But I kind of liked the footwear company. It was a national company. We worked with a lot of the big footwear brands, and it was it was small enough to where you could be immersed in a lot of different parts of the company, and also get the experience of working in a big setting too, with large companies and a large industry. So it was kind of unique that way, and I wasn't necessarily looking for it one way or the other, but it was definitely a advantage, I think, to maybe going to a big company and having one specific role and not really getting to see the whole picture.
Yes, because in some of the bigger corporates and things, you end up in a specific spot, and it's quite hard, or can be quite difficult to step out of that, partially because I think, one, they're so big, and every piece needs to work, but partially there's also, I think, that protection where somebody is, wanting to protect their job and their position.
Mm-hmm.
So
Sure.
being in a smaller company does tend to give you more opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
Did you, so once you were in there, you said that you then started to get, you started to get interested in online marketing and blogging. So how was that? Was that as part of that job with the footwear company, or was it something outside that you were then looking at it?
It started as yeah, so the footwear company, mostly obviously the catalogs is what they sent out, and then each brand had its own website, and then they had online only, still have an online only brand for selling shoes. But um, I was initially involved in just the catalog side, a little bit of an email program and the website. But when I kind of shut my own website down, that website had a forum and a blog. And it was at that time when I kind of started reading about blogging and reading about SEO and online marketing a little bit. So it kind of started where I was just curious about it on my own. And then at the same time, the company started becoming, they had already been doing a lot of things, but they started becoming more curious about, little about blogging and social media and things like that. So it kind of converged where I was able to eventually kind of work on a few of the online marketing programs. They'd already been doing a lot, but a few of them, like the blogging and social media, I was able to kind of learn on my own and then experiment on my own, and then also work with the footwear company with it a little bit.
If you keep seeing my hand, my neighbors have been having work done since about June, and their preference appears to be to start hammering and things whenever I'm recording. It's very, well timed. I'm not sure if they're just watching or um, so I just keep muting. So when you're there, you're starting to investigate other things. You still got that curiosity about, learning about the new things that are coming along and evolving. Did you still have an inkling or a desire to do your own business, or were you at that point actually settled into thinking, no, this is where my career is taking me now, and I'm in business, but in a bigger company?
It was, yeah, it was kind of, for a couple of years, it was a transition where for so long I had been trying to think of a business idea. And after I shut the website down, it was kind of just, okay, let's stop trying to think of an idea. Maybe let's just do a few things, learn about a few things, and see if anything pops up. So I definitely thought in the future I would want to operate a business. I enjoyed where I was working and doing that job and learning and the people. And I remember always thinking that I could certainly work here for a long time. I enjoyed it. Um, it was a great place to work, very stable. But yeah, always kind of in the back of my mind, I was open to opportunities. I wasn't necessarily seeking out opportunities, but open to something kind of finding me.
Point. Hopefully
Yep.
something will come along and that's going to tell me where I need to go.
Yeah, and I must have said something to that effect, or what I had done up to that point, because I remember my boss said, I think when I eventually left the company, he said he always thought that at some point I would. So maybe something in my personality, and he seemed to know right from the beginning that that was a possibility.
Which is actually, really brilliant, because some people would, especially if they saw that when they were initially interviewing you and meeting you and you'd already had a business, that they would see that as a problem, that they would be worried that this was just a time filler until you found the next thing. So for him to have that belief and go, no, actually, well, I think he's going to go, I still think he's the right guy for the job, and I'll take that chance, is fantastic.
Yeah, no, there was other coworkers that had similar inklings and had certain businesses in their past, and I think, and I know some that would start new businesses and leave, but I think my boss knew that that type of personality was good for the position, and that a lot of times people that had started their own businesses would come into the company and stay because they would realize about themselves that they kind of got to manage in a more comfortable, stable setting. Not that they weren't capable of running a business, but maybe they just preferred that lifestyle of working in a very stable, conservative type company. So I think that's part of the balance he used was he needed that type of person, but so he knew there was risk of them leaving, but a lot of times I think people would stay.
And as you say, sometimes you think you want something, and
Mm-hmm.
it's only once you've tried it that you realize you don't. And that's one of the things that I know I talk to, I speak to a lot of entrepreneurs at all different stages in their businesses. And for a lot of them, it's that loneliness
Mm-hmm.
and that pressure where it's all resting on your shoulders. And for some people, that's not for them, which is absolutely fine. But until you try it, you don't necessarily know.
Right. Yep.
So you started doing some blogging. And then how did that lead you into actually taking the decision to say, do you know what? This is a full-time job. This is something I can now take off and do instead of working in this company.
Yeah, so I started a personal blog that was just writing about things I was learning at work, um, things I was reading about. I would try to find questions that I might see around that time. Twitter was just starting, and a lot of people, there wasn't as many people using it, and you could see people asking questions, and I would take a question and I would be curious. If I had the answer, I would write a blog post about it. If I didn't have the answer, I would maybe do a little research. And so I kind of started a personal blog doing that. And after about a year, a small business owner I knew through a friend of a friend asked me if I would write a weekly blog post for their business website, their blog on their business website. And so I started doing that, just a way to make an extra couple $100 a month, I think it was. And then after that, I was doing that for a month or two. And then on Twitter, I was following some CEO of a company, and he sent out a tweet asking for a blogger for a side project that he was doing. So I reached out and I started writing weekly posts for him. And so that was another couple $100 a month. And then I think I started looking at job boards and seeing listings for bloggers. And so I reached out to a few more. So by after a few months of that, I realized I was making, I think, close to $1,000 on the side just in the evenings and on the weekends. And that helped to pay off a little bit of the debt that I had accumulated. But even while I was doing that, I guess I still kind of looked at it as a hobby. And then eventually it hit me that maybe this could be more of an agency where I have writers working for me, and I kind of set up a system that makes it easy for the writers and gets the blogs to the companies that need them. And so it eventually turned into an idea, but it wasn't like a initial spark when it should have been, but I didn't really see it that way from the beginning.
I think that's normal though. I think sometimes you just get this, flash of lightning or whatever and you've got that spark. But other times it just evolves and you do suddenly go, "Oh, actually, this is where I
Mm-hmm.
can take it." So when you decided to turn it into the agency, when you decided to make it into something that was no longer that, bit of money on the side, how did it feel? And how did your family and friends react as well? Having seen you go through the website and that didn't work out, now
Mm-hmm.
seeing you stable and doing well and paying off some of the debt, how did how did they respond to it? Were they supportive? Were they worried?
It was so I looking back, I realized I wasn't the best communicator about kind of because I was kind of doing this all behind the scenes. I wasn't really talking about it. Um, I I would mention it to friends, and they probably in family, and they would probably say, "Oh, he's just a blogger in his basement. It's a hobby." which I understand because if I didn't give them enough information about it, I think some of it stemmed from the website. Not that I talked a lot about the website, but since it was a failure, I didn't really want to talk about blogging in a way that made it seem like this big thing. So I didn't really talk about it. And then after about a year and a half, 2 years, I was making enough money kind of as a half agency, half freelancer that I decided I was going to leave the company. And and my girlfriend, now wife at the time, she was very supportive and encouraged me. And I obviously talked to her about it, but close family and friends, I had some family who I told that I was leaving my job, and their first reaction was, I said I had put in my notice, and the first reaction was, can you take it back? Can you still have the job? But so it wasn't a lot of support, but looking back, it was probably my own fault for not really communicating what the situation was. I mean, they probably thought, okay, he's just quitting his job and maybe trying to figure it out from scratch again. And I think they were just worried, but it was, so yeah, that's kind of how that situation was.
Again, from people I've spoken to and, from my own experience as well, I do think, though, that if somebody doesn't have that desire or experience of running their own business, that there is an almost natural, I guess, tendency to be thinking, well, hang on a second, you're somewhere that is going well, it's secure, it's got all of these things. Why would you want to leave? Why would you want to take that risk? So it's a concern for you as opposed to necessarily a doubt in your abilities. But it relates to their perception of what is safe and secure rather than what is maybe your perception of what you need as well.
Yep, definitely.
And how did you feel about it? Were you feeling confident in it? Were you thinking, yes, this is it? Or was there again some trepidation, okay, am I just going to repeat what happened before, or have I learned enough and I've got a much better idea of what I'm doing that this one is going to be different?
Yeah, it kind of reached a point where a lot of different factors were coming together. I thought there was enough potential in what I was doing to make a living and maybe get beyond making a living. And the company I was working for was still great, was getting a little bit bigger, kind of a little more bureaucracy and less freedom. And not that it was wrong or anything, it was starting to not mesh well with my personality. So that was kind of coming on board. And then I also knew an entrepreneur who several years before was in their 20s and had 2 young kids and a wife and started their own company. And so that also was on my mind. And I thought, here I am in my 20s. I don't have hardly any commitments beyond myself. I don't have any debt. I don't think at the time I had any debt anymore. So it was kind of like, I can live on the bare minimum if need be. I can always pick up a side job. It just kind of, everything came together that proved to me now this is worth trying. And if I fall on my face, I was pretty confident that it would work. I could figure it out. And if it didn't, I was confident I could find something else to do.
Which is great, because having that self-belief and that ability to take the leap and to know that you've got plans, you've got ways to deal with it if it goes wrong, is again not what everybody's got. A lot of people will find that hard, or they have to have that security, or they have to have a stash of money that's there to support them. So it's quite a brave step to take, but a good time, as you said, in your life to make that decision.
Yeah, I kept hearing and reading and seeing a lot of entrepreneurs talk about their biggest regret. And the number one I always saw the most was they wish they would have started sooner. And I think and I feel the same way. I wish I would have started sooner. Now you think you'd be further along. And so I was thinking about that at the time as, okay, if I'm going to have this regret, I should just listen to what everyone else has said and just get started.
I interviewed Daniel Priestley. His was the last episode in July. And that was one of the things that he said, not that he had regrets, but that he felt his father had really helped him, because his father had said to him, if you're going to do it, now is the time to do it, because, you've got your parents, you've got all of this around you. If it all goes wrong, there's support there. Whereas later in life, your desire to take those risks, the people that are impacted by it is substantially different. So I think, yeah, for some people, it's absolutely, let's just go for it now while we still can. Though there are a lot of people now who have gone through a corporate career and are then coming out of that and going, okay, now I'm going to do it. And so they come to it with a different perspective, I suppose.
Yep. Yeah, I think it's got to be the same feeling, because you see people doing it later in life, but I still think you would have the same feeling that you can start it at any point, but don't put it off thinking that something needs to necessarily happen. Because you look at like the movie The Founder that came out about McDonald's, and Ray Kroc was well into his 50s when he started helping to build McDonald's into obviously one of the biggest corporations in the world. So it can happen at any time. But I think that feeling of, obviously, I'm sure he would have wanted to start it early in his life, but you have to do it when the time is when the opportunity is there.
And that's a really valid point. And sometimes the opportunity is there, even though everything else feels wrong. And again, it's being able to step out and say, yeah, it's not all perfect. There was a post that I saw on Facebook today, where somebody was saying, okay, I've been thinking about leaving my job for ages. I think, I've kind of got things roughly right. I just don't know whether to jump. And basically everybody said, go. It's never going to be perfect. It's never going to be the absolute right time. And just go now. So it's, as you say, it's doing it when it's right for you. And that can be at whatever age.
Yep.
So once you left and you started doing it, were you immediately going into trying to do it as an agency now, or were you trying to build up the number of blogs that you did yourself to begin with?
I was looking at it as building it to an agency where it eventually would be 100% writers contracted to do the writing. But when I started, it was a mix, probably 50-50, where I still needed income. And so I would kind of work on some projects and look for writers, and eventually get it to where maybe I was doing 30% and then 10%. And I think a couple years into it, then I was doing 0%. So I had the goal for it to be an agency. At the time, I probably was doing more writing than I should have been, but it was just to kind of make enough money to pay the bills. But yeah, I definitely wanted it to be an agency. And even when I was doing the managing aspects of it, I was even looking at how I could break that down to hire managers to take care of different tasks as well.
Yeah, there's somebody I spoke to the other day. I know his name's James Sinclair. He's the CEO of a company called Party Man, but he started actually when he was about 16. And he said that the one thing he kept doing was essentially looking for, what job can I sack myself from? So that whatever he was doing within his business, he was going, okay, when can I, give that to somebody else? Which is a really kind of different way to think of it as well. It's not so much what can I hire somebody to do, it's what can I take off my plate so I can focus on the things I need to do.
Yep.
Did you find that there was any, so in general, there's again a natural concern of, you knew you could write the blogs and you knew that you could write them well and that your customers were satisfied. How did you manage that, getting people on who could deliver to the right level of quality, that you weren't worrying, was your customer going to come back annoyed and upset because it wasn't up to standard?
Yeah, that That's tricky, and I'm sure it's the same for a lot of business owners, business managers. Is especially if you're the owner, I think you feel very passionate about something, and I don't think you're ever. Maybe I'll say most often you're not going to find someone who has that same passion, and so they're probably not going to get to the level where you are. You certainly can find people that are better writers, and I have found people that are better writers, and so it's understanding that it's not going to be the same as what you do. That may be a little worse, maybe better. It's just being able to let go and trusting that people are going to do a good job, and then doing all that I could to kind of enable the writers to do a good job. So making sure they had the information they needed and giving them what they needed to succeed and kind of making that my responsibility. So I wouldn't be doing the writing anymore, but my responsibility was to kind of make the writer's job easier, more enjoyable. And so I found I liked that, trying to empower whoever would replace me to give them a good opportunity to succeed.
And now that you're at the point where you've got, 60 writers all over the place and, business coming in, it's going well. What do you want to do now? Or are you going, yeah, this is it. This is fine. I'm just going to see this sustainable. Or do you have plans and visions for where you either want to take this business or something else?
Yeah, I guess the last probably 4 to 5 years, I've been trying to work to a point where it's a comfortable lifestyle business, and that's kind of where it's reached now. Um, got through some life milestones like marriage, house, baby, and that has brought along different money requirements. So that's kind of kept focus on making a certain amount of money, and it's very much kind of a lifestyle business. But now I'm kind of getting to the point where I'm starting to remove myself even more from certain tasks, or looking at how I can do that, and then looking at if the business has the potential to grow to something bigger. So I would like to do that. If it's been about 5 years to get to where we are now, maybe the next 5 years, that's kind of, I would say, what my goal would be: remove myself more so I can kind of see where it can go.
And just bringing in, you've mentioned the family, being a husband, being a father, and how do you make sure that you're giving the attention that you want to give to your family, to your personal, well-being, and just looking after yourself? How do you manage that, and what do you do to keep yourself well, I suppose?
Yeah, and I don't know that I do it the right way or if I'm doing well, but I do try to put emphasis on my wife and now my baby girl as well, that they're important. It's hard because you almost see a business as a spouse or a baby, and things can seem very urgent with the business. So I might get an email that seems urgent, and if my wife comes in needing to talk about something in my brain says the email is more important. But if I step away, obviously my wife is number one, and the email that can be handled at any point in the following 24 hours is not important. But that's always a struggle. Is I think, I don't know if I'm the only one, I don't think, but kind of taking your personal life for granted, that it's always going to be there. But I'm been working on it, and I think I do a pretty good job. Removing myself from the business has kind of allowed me to get away from the 9 to 5, 40 hours a week life. It's more flexible. I can be there for time with my wife and now time with my daughter. So I think I'm getting there and doing well, but I definitely still have slip up moments when my priorities are out of whack.
There is something about, I think with technology and with all of these ways of communicating, there is almost that sense, whether the person who's contacted you actually intended it or not, where we do
Mm-hmm.
think we have to respond right away. And as you
Yeah.
say, taking that step back and going, actually, it doesn't have to be dealt with right away. This is more important, my wife, my friends, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
And making sure that you stick to that. Because I know somebody I used to work with, and he had this really, I was always amazed. So he was a client of mine. Whenever I wrote to him, I got answers like that.
Mm-hmm.
And he said that, when we were working together, he realized that he felt like he had to answer right away. And so we set in place that actually he would only check his emails at certain times. And for him, that was really difficult initially, but it was his pressure, not,
Mm-hmm.
I had no expectation of an instant answer. Because
Mm-hmm.
that to me is the point of an email, is I send it to you. And unless I've said it's urgent, I expect you to respond,
Mm-hmm.
hopefully not in a year's time, but in a sensible time frame.
Yep. I'm kind of learning that it's, as far as people's expectations, it's about consistency. So if you respond within 24 hours consistently, people are 100% comfortable with it. It's kind of that sending an email and maybe not knowing when you're going to hear back that makes us uneasy. And so I've tried to focus on that. If I'm consistent and not one email I respond to immediately and the next one I respond to in 2 days, I think that's where I've gotten into trouble. So I'm trying to just be consistent, and then that seems to lead to no issues at all with writers or clients or whoever it might be.
It's just finding that balance, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, Dayne, looking back, you've had, experiences of, two businesses now, as well as being in the footwear catalog company. What would you say? What advice would you give to the people, who are maybe either just in the midst of, they're starting up and building their business, or maybe thinking about starting their own business? What sort of tips or advice do you have?
A big one, I think nowadays there's a lot of ways to easily start a business or start the appearance of a business. You can start a website, you can register the company with the state or whatever the government agency might be. You can get a name, you can get logo, you can get business cards. It's easy to start a business. What I've kind of found, not in my own example, it's true, but I've also seen it with others that have been successful, is that you don't need any of that stuff to start a business. You can start giving a product, you can start providing a service before anything is official. So that would be one tip I have, is focus on finding a need, focus on finding a client or customer who is buying something from you, and start taking care of that first before any of the other stuff. That is easy to start at any point. And I think it's easy to trick yourself into thinking that you're building a business by kind of doing the surface stuff, but it ultimately comes down to getting customers, selling, finding new customers, now it's easy to see job ads and see where demand is for services and things like that. So that's kind of the big tip, is finding customers, giving them what they're looking for before any of the other business type stuff.
And that's a really, valid point, because as you say, and I think sometimes it's a delaying tactic, even if people don't realize it. It's almost that fear of putting yourself out there. So by spending all of this time getting everything set up, you feel like you're making progress, you feel like you're working, and you're avoiding that moment when you've actually got to go out there and essentially sell yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So it feels kind of safe, but it's avoiding. So
Yep.
I think that's a great bit of advice. One thing I was just thinking about, so because you're a ghost blog writing agency, so that means that, if I hired you, according to what anybody else would see, it would be me who had written the blog.
Yep.
How how do you then advertise that? How do you go to clients and go, hey, we're the right people for you? Because I might not be very happy if you're going, hey, Deborah's blog is actually written by me. So how do you establish that credibility with new clients or prospective clients?
That's one of the biggest challenges. We do have a few clients that allow us to kind of create case studies, and we also kind of create a case study for our own blog. And we also have a couple of blogs that we've started where, well, I started one kind of as an experiment. It's not a real, or it's two companies that are not real. It's kind of a fake service. And I launched two websites, and one has a blog and one doesn't. And I write for that every week. And now over the years, I just kind of have a case study to show the difference in traffic to those websites. So that was something I identified early on. But and then we do have clients or prospective clients that ask for samples, and then that's why we do the trial post, so we can kind of provide them a sample for them. But it is a challenge. We can talk about industries we've worked in, not specific clients usually. So it is kind of a challenge. I think over the years, and people can see that we've been established since 2010. Our website has been up, and the various Google rankings are pretty good. I think there's a trust factor there, and then being able to trial the service is also establishes some trust. And over the years, you get mentions online and referrals and things like that. So there's other indicators, but for the ghostwriting industry, and I'm sure it's the case with other industries too, that's one of the biggest challenges. And not just for our company, but also for the writers. And so I try to help the writers too, when they can say that they work in specific industries, and if they ever need a reference, they can use me or our manager, Lindy, as a reference if they can't necessarily talk about specific work that they do.
Yes, because actually I hadn't thought about them specifically either, that of course they've written all of this stuff, but it's not under their name, so they can't just be going, here's an example of what I wrote. So that's great that you're thinking of them as well. And how do people typically find you? So do people know that there are ghost blog writers out there generally, and they're specifically searching for it, or is it something that they're unaware of, but they kind of stumble across?
When a business or manager or marketing manager, I think they want a blog, they'd probably go and search for I know they search for things like blog writing services and blogging services or blog writers and all kinds of things like that. They start searching and seeing the companies that come up, our company and the competitors, and each kind of does it a little different. And I think they do research that way. They may ask their network of colleagues at other companies if they have a service that provides their blog writing, or if they do it themselves or someone internal. So we get referrals that way. And so I think that's where it mostly is. I don't know that the need has been there for at least 10 years or so, where people have been searching for that kind of service. And I do see a lot of blogs that are kind of abandoned, where the owner probably doesn't realize there's a service like ours that could help them out. I don't know that the awareness is very good, but there's enough there to sustain the business, obviously.
Which is obviously important.
And we do have a program that's fairly new this year, where we have someone that kind of looks for our ideal client and sees if maybe their blog has been abandoned, and we'll reach out and just kind of introduce our service and say, if you're interested in this exists. And so we do a little bit of that as well.
Okay, so tackling it from the other end, basically, and because I know, writing blogs it's something that I enjoy doing,
Hmm.
but find difficult to find the time. And the main blogs that I now put out are actually related to my podcast releases. So
Yep.
I know there's a regular flow of things going out there, but the actual blog itself has tended to take a back seat to
Hmm.
that. So I can definitely see, where the need comes from as well. But hopefully mine won't be showing up on your abandoned list.
Oh, no, no, the podcasts, videos, and blogs, they're all the same. It's people have preferences in what they prefer to create, and people have preferences for how they consume it. But it's the same thing. Um, Kind of creating consistent content is kind of the name of the game. So if podcasting is the way that works best for you, it's still doing great things.
Yeah, and I find it a lot. I shouldn't say more enjoyable because I do like writing blogs, but I think it's the interaction. It's meeting, people like you who I wouldn't have come across otherwise and having that conversation and putting them out. So mine, I had a break over August and then I'll have a break at Christmas again. So just to split things up, but knowing that they're going out every week as well. Just
Hmm.
as you say, it's consistent. People know when to expect it, which is great.
Yep.
So Dayne, just before we wrap up, is there anything that you'd like to say to our listeners on, any topic from any angle?
Yeah, I would say I can't remember if we mentioned it before or during, but I know loneliness is a big thing for business owners. I feel I was fortunate where I have a wife who's very supportive and is willing to be kind of in the business with me, but you won't often find satisfaction from other people saying, "Oh, great job on the business." People just they're busy doing their own things. They're not going to give you praise for starting a business or running a business. I think it has to be in you have to get your own internal satisfaction from kind of the everyday things. So I found that I get satisfaction from having clients that after 6 months to a year they say we're seeing the traffic increase. We've gotten more leads the last month than we did the previous year, and so I get joy from that. I get joy from working with the writers, and even the problems that come up almost every day and trying to solve those. That's where the satisfaction comes from versus telling other people that I run a blogging business and trying to get some praise. It's just not something that happens. So I think if you're looking to gauge whether you can do a business, kind of run a business, I think that's an important thing to look at. Is if would you enjoy doing it if you couldn't tell anyone that you were doing it, type of thing.
That is a really great piece of advice. And actually, it's not something that anybody else has spoken about. We've spoken about loneliness generally,
Sure.
but finding that satisfaction yourself and being
Mhm.
able to give yourself approval, that is the first time anybody's spoken about that. So that's a really lovely point to end on. So thank you very much, Dayne. I've really enjoyed talking to you.
Yeah, it's been good. Thank you so much for having me on.
You're very welcome. And I will post up, once the show goes out, I will post up your contact details. So if anybody does want to get in touch with you, they'll be able to find you as well.
All right, that sounds great.
Great. So we'll have a good, looking at the time, a good afternoon over there in
Yep.
Wisconsin. Enjoy the autumn, and we'll talk again soon.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much. Cheers. I've been in conversation with Dayne Shuda of Ghost Blog Writers. You can learn more about Ghost Blog Writers at ghostblogwriters.com. All of Dayne's details will be available in the accompanying show notes. Next week, I'm in conversation with Mindy Gibbons Klein. Mindy is the multi-award winning founder of Real Thought Leaders, The Book Midwife, and Panama Press. She has presented to and coached over 50,000 leaders and entrepreneurs in 18 countries, has an enviable list of over 700 published clients, and her TEDx talk, Sometimes You Need to Change Yourself to Be Yourself, has had nearly 500,000 views and focuses on identity, self-esteem, and transgender issues. So join me next week to hear all about Mindy. Have you thought about starting your own podcast, but really want somebody to guide you through the process to make sure that you get everything you need in place so that your podcast is up and running as quickly as possible? Why not check out my podcast launcher? Just go to bridgeroadconsultants.com/product-launcher. Again, the details will be available in the show notes.
You've been listening to Deborah Levitt on Bridging Gaps, the business podcast.